Hello, everyone. Welcome back. I'm one of your co-hosts, Rico Borrego.
I am your other co-host, Tony Borrego.
And this is the podcast known as Relatively Sound, the podcast that is brought to you by Phantom Radio. Tony, what are we going to be doing today?
Today, we're going to be hearing your thoughts and knowing you maybe some hot takes about Mark Lanegan's 2014 record, Phantom Radio, which was the first record that I got into from Lanegan. It's one of those albums that came out. I got to experience like the release of it more. So, yeah.
Yes, we are back with our monthly album to album series, and today will be Tony's episode. As he mentioned, we're going to be talking about Mark Lanegan's 9th studio album, Phantom Radio, which came out in 2014. And real quick, my brief history with Mark Lanegan is that I actually think the very first thing I ever listened to something from him besides like Queens of the Stone Age was his covers album, which for some reason I'm blanking on the title of it.
I think it's called Imitations.
Yeah. And it's where it's an album where he does cover songs. And I think I rented it from our public library.
Oh yeah.
And I don't know why. I think he's associated with Seattle. Or at least I think he is. I mean,
he is from Ellensburg.
Well, yeah, because his first big band was the Screaming Trees, which I only know their one main hit, which was Nearly Lost You. But I just saw his name pop up, like, when I was trying to get into music, especially like Seattle music, grunge, rock, his name would pop up. He was a member of Queens of the Stone Age for a while, off and on. He would come in and, he has some songs on Rated R, Songs for the Deaf. And then after that, he would just kind of appear every now and again and do like backing vocals. What was that?
Sorry, I accidentally muted myself. On Lullabies, he does a few little small moments. Full songs where it's
he does have one song on Lullabies.
Well, actually, you're right. Yeah.
Which I will actually be mentioning later on in this episode. But so I actually think I maybe listened to that covers album he did before I even listened to much Queens of the Stone Age, because I didn't get into Queens of the Stone Age till later on. Which, if you go listen to one of our 2 Queens of the Stone Age episodes, you'll hear our thoughts on them. But so I've never, besides this cover album, which cover albums aren't even technically like their own material, I've never heard any of his solo albums. And I know this album is credited by the Mark Lanegan Band too.
Yes.
Which, looking at like their history online, it's hard to even see who's in it. Like I bet you it's one of those bands where there's like members come and go as they please, kind of like Queens of the Stone Age. But
I actually saw them live for this tour.
Okay, that's literally was going to be the question I was just going to ask you, because I remember you went and saw them, because I remember you got a poster from the show, and so this was a tour you probably saw them then in 2014 around that time.
Yes, I did, and it was a great show. I will say it was interesting because he, like, the whole time he just stood up straight at the mic. He didn't take it off the stand. He just stood up straight, but he looked like a total badass. I don't know how many people could pull off just standing straight, dressed in all black, and just look that naturally cool.
Yeah, and I guess to kind of describe his sound before we get into this album, at least just like his vocal approach, he's got a very rich, deep voice. I don't know, baritone?
Yeah, I mean, he maybe he falls in the bass category.
Yeah,
but I will say this though. I kind of have a 2-part to this. So I will say that you hear his voice described as supple as leather, whiskey stained. But he does have quite a large range. A lot of the Screaming Tree stuff, he just sings some pretty impressive like belts and whatnot.
Yeah, which I've not, like I said, I only know that one Screaming Tree song. So, and then obviously I feel like on Queens of the Stone Age, he just mostly kind of sings in that lower range for the most part.
Right.
He doesn't do much of the screaming.
But he has like the sickest like rock delivery, like the way because Josh produces those records, right? Like the way they produced his like vocal takes, like the distortion they put on it is just killer. Now the second half to kind of what I was saying was, so the Imitations record, he covers a lot of old timey songs like Mac the Knife, Solitaire, other acoustic artists. You Only Live Twice, and so hearing that, very mellow covers album, and then hearing Queens of the Stone Age, the stoner rock, heavy, heavy music. How like I'm just curious, what did you expect with this album? Because I would say it kind of lies somewhere in the middle.
Well, to be fair, I haven't heard that covers album in a while. I should have listened to it in prep for this episode, but I didn't. But I do remember it being a little bit more laid back instrumentally. Where Queens of the Stone Age are kind of the opposite instrumentally. They're like kind of really in your face rock. And I was expecting a dark music for the most part because he just strikes me as someone as a songwriter. He pulls from like life experiences. And even though I know he has two like memoirs out, two like autobiographies, um, one that was just released a little because we should mention he unfortunately passed away. I think literally just last year.
I think
Um,
so.
I think it was actually due to he got COVID, like I think in 2020, and just couldn't really, you know, get better from it. I think he had like long term effects. But he had just released his I think second book. I know he's done other books with like poetry, but like an actual like memoir.
Which I actually
And
have sitting right next to me here. Sing Backwards and Weep, I believe is the title.
yeah, and I know he has a pretty like dark life. So I was expecting like darker music, and I was for some reason expecting it to either be rock, like kind of slow, heavy rock, kind of like Queens of Stone Age, but not more with the desert rock, kind of like the slower, or I was expecting kind of more acoustic, kind of like okay, so the one song he sings on the main song he sings on Lullabies to Paralyze, the Queens of the Stone Age album, is the first song, This Lullaby, the opening track. And it's a really short song, but it's like it's acoustic, it's kind of dark, and I kind of thought that's what the album would be. So going into it, I was like, it's either going to be kind of slow, heavy rock, or it's going to be kind of acoustic, dark rock. Either way, I thought it was going to be dark. And I would say on my first impressions was lyrically and vocally, it is a dark album, but there are way more shades of other colors than just like black when you listen to the album. The one thing I was kind of not expecting was when you go on Wikipedia, this album, the genre is either considered blues, which I wouldn't go as far to say blues, but they also listed as folktronica, which is not even a genre I was familiar with, but it's basically the mashing of the genre of folk music and electronica music. Um,
That's kind of hilarious. I love
and
it.
it's because a lot of this album relies on there's like kind of musically there's like a theme, which is a lot, which I'll explain this in a second, but a lot of like program drums and then a lot of synths. And Wikipedia tells me that he actually wrote a lot of the drum parts with a phone app called Funkbox, which is not an app I'm familiar with, but I assume it's something kind of like GarageBand where you can, create your own drum parts or, already have like drum parts there for you to use, like loops. And it's very apparent on this album because like every song that has drums, they sound like programmed drums, except for some reason when you go to the liner notes, apparently Jack Irons drums on the first song, the opening track, which I don't know if you knew that.
Yeah, I just read that the other week. I actually didn't know that though, so that was pretty cool
Yeah.
to
And
hear.
maybe the first song, Harvest Home, now that I'm like listening back to the song, maybe that's the one song that has the most like real drum sound to it. But there are some songs where it's very apparent it's just like a drum loop. Or it's very apparent that it's like electronic drum, synthetic drums. Um, which I was not expecting. And then there's a lot of synth work too, which I kind of wasn't expecting either. So I was thrown up for a loop a little bit, because I really wasn't expecting it to be so, like I was expecting all full instrument. Well, I was either expecting like a lot of just acoustic stripped back songs or like, full drums and bass. But there's some songs where like if there is a bass, it might even be like a synthetic bass. There's some times where I'm not even sure if there's a bass on the song.
So
Um,
maybe to put some context here, his first few records, I imagine, especially because he was playing in the Screaming Trees, he probably wanted to do something different, and not sing these belty rock songs. He did start off definitely more acoustic, more mellow. And what's kind of interesting is he definitely does go to some bluesy tones a little bit with some of the rock he does in his solo career. But I think you're totally right. Like there definitely is like more of a synth focus, synthetic kind of process sound, um, which I think makes this album definitely stand out in that way alone.
yeah, and the other thing I wanted to point out too before we like really get into the album is I feel like the other thing when you listen to him is his voice, and the reason we keep talking about his voice is because I feel like it's a very prominent part of his music. Which I mean, I guess that's for anyone who sings, but like his voice, I kind of consider it to be like if you had a more refined Tom Waits. Because first of all, Tom Waits that was the first album you gave me for our series for the podcast, one of the first episodes we recorded. And although Mark Lanegan's voice was more like refined in the sense that like he wasn't sometimes Tom Waits will just go somewhere with a song you're not expecting and he'll like do scatting bits and whatnot. But like he also has a voice that sounds like it's rough, that sometimes it can be harsh. Um, and Mark Lanegan definitely has that to his voice. Which I'm sure he just always has had like a deeper voice, but probably with just his life and his upbringing, like it's added to that to make it like extra rough. And like one of the things too is like his vibrato. Like he has a very prominent vibrato, which I don't mind. Some people don't like vibrato, or some people are picky with how singers sing with their vibrato, but I don't mind it. But he did give me like pails of Tom Waits when it
I
comes to
think
singing.
that's fair. Kind of, I do agree with you saying. I feel like Mark is a little more, because Tom Waits is very intentional with his delivery, but sometimes Tom just puts his foot all the way on the gas. Um, where I think Mark is a little more, I don't want to say strategic, but he's a little more maybe intentional, a little more cautious when doing so. He kind of like knows his sweet spots with his voice and he sings in that way. And you can tell that he's like kind of comfortable with it, but like I still think he like puts in the effort. He's not just kind of half-ass singing, these low songs.
Yeah, and getting into the album now, my first impression, besides being a little surprised by the somewhat of the electronic sounds, um, I would say on my first couple listens, I enjoyed it, but nothing stood out to me on the first couple listens. Like,
Ouch.
and not in a bad way, not like because all the songs sound the same, but just like there. I will say this: there was no song. Well, the only song that like I didn't love right away was Judgment Time, the second song. But everything else, there wasn't really anything that like, unlike let's say the Tom Waits album, there was a couple songs I did not like on first listen. With this album, there was nothing like that. Where like on first listen, or even like okay, even going back to like the last couple albums you give me, the Zombies album, I did not like that one song that I can't
The
even think of it.
Butcher's Tale.
Yeah, or going back to Maggie McGee with the Doors album, like I did not like that song at all. There's nothing on here that I like disliked, so that's already a good start. It did take me those extra, on the fourth, fifth, and sixth listens. That's when it took me to kind of start digging deeper. Um, and I think some of that is because this album, it does kind of sometimes it will blend together a little bit, which I appreciate when albums do that to an extent because like I do like cohesiveness in an album, which is something that a word we use a lot when we talk about albums. And I think it is important to have songs that sound like they should be together and not just like hodgepodged in. But um, it, I will say the one thing that like now having listened to it, a handful of times, I do wish some of the songs took a little bit more of a live approach when it comes to like especially the bass and the drums. Um, because like I said, okay, going now like into some of the songs, the opener Harvest Home, that one felt like a full song. I could hear that song being played live with real drums and the guitars and bass. And it's a great album opener. And I actually thought more of the songs would sound like that one. I was like, okay, the songs are either going to sound like this song, or I thought the songs were going to sound like a song like "I Am the Wolf," which is like right almost in the middle of the album, where it's stripped back, acoustic guitar. Kind of that song reminds me of "This Lullaby," the song he sings for Queens of the Stone Age. Um,
Mm.
so all the songs that didn't sound like Harvest Home or I'm the Wolf, so songs like The Killing Season, Floor of the Ocean, Torn Red Heart, Waltzing in Blue, like Wild People, those were some of the songs that like surprised me with the way they sounded with the instrumentation, especially with the drums and bass. So like I thought it started off great with Harvest Home. I do wish some of the other song and like some like Floor of the Ocean, like that's a song that took a little bit to grow on me because like that by the time that song played, which is the third song on the album, that's when I kind of knew, okay, this album actually has kind of more. I wrote a more of a pop production to it with the electronic drums, um, and like anything that wasn't having to do with the drums or bass, I enjoyed. Like I thought the vocal melody of Floor of the Ocean was kind of very eerie, but like there's a lot of things I liked about it, especially like the lyrics. I love the lyric, "Can I mind my way through the core of emotion?" Because it sets up him singing, "Floor of the Ocean" later on. Like I like rhyme schemes like that.
Right,
Um,
right.
and I like the chorus a lot to "Floor of the Ocean." I like the softer harmony. It sounded like there was a female vocal doing some backup. Um, had like a little guitar kind of solo part that was nice. Um, and then there's even like a key change, I believe, near the end of the song too, that kind of makes it stand out. Um, so like with that song, I'm like, okay, that there's, like, but okay, like a song like Seventh Day, where I'm like, immediately I like that song, Seventh Day, because I felt a little funky. Like there's a little kind of like wah guitar thing going on in the background for the majority of the song. The vocal melody is really catchy. There's strings. It sounds like there's like strings and stuff happening during the chorus to kind of give it texture. Um, but that's a song where I feel like it would have been great to have more realistic sounding drums, and maybe a more prominent bass line. And even for the guitar, probably my least favorite part on the whole album is the guitar solo on Seventh Day. It's
Really?
yeah, because it literally what it sounds like, it's not even a solo. It's like a small solo, like a little like
Wait,
riff.
I don't think I don't know if I would call that guitar. I don't.
Maybe it's not guitar. Then
Are you
maybe
talking
it's
about the thing
keyboard.
that's like boom doo doo doom doo boom doo boom that
Yeah,
thing?
because maybe it's not guitar. But okay, so then that's where I'm coming from. Is I wish it had been guitar instead of keys, and I wish it was actually playing something more interesting. Because my problem was it repeats for like it's like the length of like an average guitar solo or solo of any instrument, but it just repeats, and I could tell it's a loop because there's a at the end of the measure when it's done the first time, you hear almost like a voice about to start speaking. You hear this like, and I'm assuming maybe it's like, I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's a voice. I don't know if it's just part of the keyboard pad or whatever that they're using, but it sounds like, and you hear it at the end of every like measure. So I could that's how I could tell it was a loop. And not only did I not like it just repeating the same thing over and over and over for that little section, but I just didn't like the notes they chose. Like I think intentionally they were choosing something that sounded funky, but it sounded funky like in a kind of a bad way to my ears. Like, and some people will like that sound, and I assume you probably like that sound because you tend to like some of those kind of dissonant notes and stuff. But it ruined the song a little bit for me because I liked what the song was setting up until that point.
Huh, I'm kind of surprised. I mean, as you explain it, like I see where you're coming from, and that does sound like a very Rico response. Um, but I don't know. I think for me, that lead kind of gives a splash of color, um, to the album because there's not, because you mentioned the melodies are good on this record, and I think that's really the only sort of I mean, I wouldn't even call it atonal, but that's one of the more spicy, melodies on the album for sure. It is very dry though, that synth sound, and that's kind of something that I actually do want to discuss because you're expressing that you wish there was more kind of a live band feel. And the concert I saw was 2014. I don't remember the track listing, but I do remember they played Harvest Home. And honestly, some of those songs, and even from other records when they're a little more processed, those songs really did rock out live. Um, so I think they're definitely capable of that. But yeah, I think for the approach of this record, I thought they did a good job of having a lot of maybe loops and synths and effects and whatnot, but not having them all sound the same in each song. Like I don't hear Waltzing in Blue and immediately go, oh, that's the same synth from Floor of the Ocean, and or whatever.
No, I agree. I agree to a point because I do think, because remember, this is like what did we say, his ninth studio album. That's a lot of albums, and that's not even including, that's just solo. That's not including Queens of the Stone Age, Screaming Trees. So it totally makes sense for him to go to this approach. And I don't know his other solo albums. I assume this was maybe one of his first ventures into this folk electronic sound. And in which case, that's totally fine. Like, I totally changing it up.
Oh,
You need to change it up. What?
I didn't even know this, but Imitations came out a year before this record.
Oh, okay. So, which, okay. So, Imitations probably was like, I don't know. He probably was like wanting to do some covers. Cause I will say, looking at the track list, not all the songs in Imitations are like older bands. Like the very first song, Flatlands from Imitations, it's a Chelsea Wolfe song. She's relatively a newer artist. Like her music, I think, let's see, her first album came out in 2006. And Flatlands is
Oh,
actually one of the standouts to me on that covers
oh,
album.
my favorite by far on there.
Yeah. And then
And the original is really great
and
too.
he also does like a Nick Cave song, which I mean, they're not like super super old comparatively to some of these others, but so it sounds like maybe like Phantom Radio was like the start of a new sound for him. Like Imitation was kind of wrap up, some loose ends and stuff, and then maybe he was like, okay, now that I did the covers album, I want to start doing something a little different sounding. Because like even if I go to the album before Imitations called Black Pudding, it's categorized generally by blues and alternative rock.
And
So
there's some other dude, Duke Garwood, whoever he is, who looks like he like co-wrote the songs.
yeah. So I mean, it is interesting. I wish there was more, and maybe there's articles online. I just didn't research, but like I'd be interested to see how, maybe in his book. I do want to read one of his memoirs one of these days. Maybe there's a time where he talks about how he wrote these songs, because again, he wrote the drum parts through this app on a phone, which, like, around 2014, I think there was a lot of musicians doing stuff like that. But for someone to do it that has a background in grunge, rock, blues, it is more interesting. So I do really like the approach on the album. There's just times where like I wish there was a little bit more of a mix, because like Floor of the Ocean into the Killing Season, like some of the tones kind of blend in a little too much for me. And I like both songs on their own. Like Killing Season, when I heard it, I wonder if maybe I've heard you play it before, just like out loud, like on your speakers or whatever, because it sounded very familiar to me. Like especially the intro, like synth. I don't know why. Like
I
maybe
think I've
it's
sent you that song before,
okay. Yeah.
and
So
you
like,
were surprised like how upbeat it felt.
yeah. So I recognized that that was the only song that like I recognize on this album. Like I didn't know any of these songs at all. So it was a good album in that sense that I didn't know anything. And it sounded like, it kind of sounded like with the synths like early 2000s, which I thought was really interesting, because I would not expect Mark Lanegan to like pull from an early 2000s kind of sound, but I kind of thought that's how it sounded. But I like the atmospheric guitars that kind of come in after the first verse. There's a little time where like the music stops for a second before he starts singing again. Um, I do think it has one of the best vocal melodies on the album when he sings the phrase "when this killing season's over." Like that's a great. We have talked about this before on many episodes, where I'm a sucker for some great vocal melody, especially when it's just like one line in a verse. And that's one of those songs, the Killing Season, where like you get that great little hook, and that to me is the hook of the song more than like a chorus or anything. Um, and there's some
I
cool
do love
moments.
the I do love the part like the song's like so upbeat and he's just like first they hang Mary, then they hang Jack.
I know this song, a lot of these songs, I will say lyrically, I feel like there's there's a lot being said, but I just don't know what it is. Like I even wrote in my notes, what does he mean when he says tonight they hang Jerry, tonight they hang Jack? Like,
Oh, it's Jerry, not Mary, my bad.
yeah, but like I'm like, what does that mean? Some of these songs I thought had to do with religion. Let's see, what song was it? Well, Seventh Day, I wonder if it had to do with religion.
Yeah,
Like,
as I say, just the title
the
alone.
title,
I
the
don't know too
Seventh
much about
Day.
that stuff though.
And then and I'm the Wolf, he sings about um Leviathan, which I had to look up because that word was like familiar to me, but I didn't know what it was. And it's like a sea serpent in like mythology and in certain like Bible stories. Um, so there's definitely I think some themes of religion. So I'm curious if like he was brought up in a certain religion, and then like he changed, like
Well, one of
as he got
the
older.
lines from I Am the Wolf, actually it's like two lines after the Leviathan lyric, says upstairs the heavens giving birth to winter storm, but I haven't died since the day I was born. That feels quite religion focused. I mean, I don't know. I don't know that much about religion, so but
Yeah, and then
that's a good
the
observation
other
maybe.
line I like from that song, "I'm the Wolf," is no one remembers names of martyrs and kings. No one remembers much of anything. Like, there's a lot of really good standout lyrics that I like. Like I said, even the when this killing season's over, like, what is that? The other song I thought that had really interesting lyrics, but I had no idea what they meant was the Wild People. Like, he's singing about like they kill the messenger, they kill the tax man waiting in line, and then later on he's like pleading like, "Mama, don't kill the messenger." And he's talking about these like wild people, and I'm like, is he talking about like a tribe of people? Is he talking about like is this is like fictional? Like what And he never really, I don't think, specifies too much. So who knows if it's some of these songs I feel like are maybe he came up with just words and phrases that sounded cool, but maybe they don't have a deeper meaning, which I'm totally cool with. Like I even write like that too sometimes. But then some of them did feel personal to his life. And even a song like "I'm the Wolf," half of it is probably like fictional or like he's talking about the Bible. Not that I'm calling the Bible fictional. We won't get into that here, but some of it, I also feel like some of "I'm the Wolf" can be him interpreting, like him using the Bible as a metaphor to moments in his life. So I did really like the lyrics on this album, even if I didn't understand what more than half of them meant. And there's
I
like,
think you made a good point about like he may have just kind of came up with stuff that sounded cool, and that it is okay. And I think let's say that is maybe more of the case than what it might realistically have been. I think he pulls it off really well by having the lines, because sometimes you hear a song and there's cool lyrics, but they aren't delivered very coolly. And I think here, like the way he says, when this killing season's over, like, you just said, like it makes that line stand out. His lyrics, um, the cadence to them is really great.
yeah, like in the killing season, the song we were just talking about, the like when he says the phrase, um what is it? I wrote it out. It's consequence instant. Is that what the word is? Is that the line?
Um,
Um or maybe I miswrote that. There's a line where like two words he says together kind of rhyme in themselves, but like the way he rolls off his tongue, like is very cool. Like you were saying, like it just sounds cool. Um, like so there's moments like that in this song or in this whole album where there's just phrases he says that
I
sound
know it's
cool.
just a coincidence, instance of my drug.
Yeah, like that
There we
line
go.
sounds cool. Or in Torn Red Heart where he sings, "It's delirium, it's a childlike dream that fades away." Um, or in the very last song, "Death Trip to Tesla."
Tulsa.
Tulsa. I wrote Tesla as a mistake. Um, this episode is not sponsored by Elon Musk. Yeah, "Death Trip to Tulsa."
I
Um,
guess it's Oklahoma.
yes, he sings like the phrase. He says, "Fell into the strangest, lonely, lonely, lonely." He like repeats it, and that again, that sounds really cool, and it's a cool line. But it's like he. There are some lines where he like doesn't dive super deep into what he's singing about, but it's cool. Like it's again, not every as someone who really loves lyrics and really dissects them, not every song has to like be super straightforward. Like I like songs that have mysteriousness to them, and sometimes those are the best because then you interpret them in your own way. Um, so, and for example, one song like that is Judgment Day, where I said that on first listen, I was on a song I didn't like, and I think
Judgment Time.
mostly, huh?
Judgment Time.
Is it Judgment Time?
Yeah, I always
Oh
think
man,
Judgment Day in my head too, even though the first line is
I just
Time of
butchered these
Judgment.
notes. It's because I'm looking at my notes right now and not the like Wikipedia page. My fault. Judgment Time. I didn't love it on first listen because mostly it's the only time on the album where I feel like the track list was not perfect. I do think as a second song, I think it's for my personal taste, it's too much of a contrast to the opening song. Where the opening song has a lot of energy. It's kind of a little bit more straightforward rock song. Judgment Time, it's like his pump organ song. But unlike Butcher's Tale, the pump organ song from the Zombies album, like this one is like a decent song. It is a good song. Um, and him singing about Judgment Time again, I think maybe has a little bit of like biblical reference, but I think it's just a very interesting, even just the phrase Judgment Time, you know, is a very interesting phrase that I could see. I mean, like on one of our songs, um, on our song Lifetime, that hopefully will be coming out next year on our first album. I there's a line where I we sing about Reckoning Day, and I just literally pulled that out of nowhere, and I just thought it sounded cool, and I'm sure with Judgment Time he actually had a meaning to it, but I just think that phrase sounds cool, and his vocal melody, kind of like Floor of the Ocean, is very haunting compared to the melody that's being played on the organ, and is again kind of like a contrast. So
What I
it's
like about this song is like the contrast, like you're saying, that I think this one, a lot of the lines stand out. Part of that is just because it's really easy to hear the vocals. And so, yeah, like when you hear the line, I saw the feet of pilgrims bleeding, you're just kind of like, what the fuck? Uh,
yeah,
it kind of hits hard for some reason.
yeah, and it's again, there's a little acoustic guitar, which is a nice touch. Um, and I do like the softer approach to the vocals. Um, but I liked it as a song, just not as like the second track, not as the follow up track to Harvest Home.
Totally
Um,
fair.
but that okay, so if that's like maybe still a little bit lower on my list of songs, I will say, what do you think is my favorite song?
If I had to take a guess, I mean, kind of based off what you're saying, I would maybe think Harvest Home because it's, more live sound. It is high. It's probably the highest energy on the album. But also knowing you don't always pick the heaviest song to be your favorite. So if I had to guess, I'm just gonna go with the Killing Season.
No, my favorite, and it's not by far, but it's the one that gets stuck in my head the most, and it's the one that I listen to outside of the album the most. It's Torn Red Heart.
Really?
Yeah,
Really?
it's first of all,
Such
I
a like
think,
an 80s sounding song.
well, yeah, it definitely this song it kind of goes a little bit against what I said earlier about me wanting this album to have a more of a full band rich sound. This one is one of the songs like Floor of the Ocean, Color Season, where like the drums very parent. It's just like a crashing like cymbal the whole time, like very much a drum loop program drums. Um, and but one thing I like about this song is musically the chords. It has a more upbeat sound. This album has a lot of darker sounds. That's why a song like this or Seventh Day, where Seventh Day also kind of has more of that major kind of chord sound. Um, it brings a little bit of different colors to the album, but like everything but the drums, I love on this song. The only thing that doesn't make this like a 10 out of 10 song for me is that the drums get a little annoying after a while. But I absolutely love the way he sings the lines. I mean, it starts off with "You Don't Love Me," which I wrote is a very simple line that I'm sure has been sung a ton by different musicians, different artists. But sometimes a simple line, the way it's sung, can overtake the clichéness that a line might have. Clichéness is probably not a word. Um, sounds like Nick Cliche, but like yeah, singing "You Don't Love Me" is a very like common probably phrase, but the way he sings, especially the third time. So in the verse, the first couple times he sings it, it's great, but that third time he sings it, it like it changes it right beneath the vocals. The music changes, the chord progression. It goes to like a new chord, and there's this like guitar bend that happens in the background, and it's so perfect. Like it's like and the guitars on the song in general like very kind of atmospheric, and they really fit with like the tone and the vibe of the song. Like vocals, he sounds like it's a softer approach. I mean, I would say that most of the album has like a softer approach. He doesn't like scream in like any of the songs or anything, but he sounds like especially hurt when he's singing these lines, which makes, because it's the song actually too lyrically is the most straightforward song too. I feel like it's like sounds like a breakup. It sounds like someone doesn't love him anymore, and torn red heart is just another way to say heartbreak, right? But it's just he really sells it with the emotion in his voice. I like how the song has like a lot of space. Um, I like the lyrics a lot. "I'm going nowhere" line near the end is great. Some of the guitar leads have this like kind of Western cowboy kind of sound, which I think I kind of dig for some reason. Like
A lot of big reverbs in this song.
yeah, it's just a very interesting song with like the tones of the instrumentation, except for the drums, but like the keys and the guitars. But it's really the lyrics and the vocal melody to really sell it for me. But yeah, it's the song that is just like I think it maybe too. It's just because it's one of the songs that sounds the most different from the album, but it's one that on first listen I really liked. But like especially in my last couple of listens of the album, it was the song I was most excited to listen to when it came on in the track list.
Well, I think that was really well said. It's not one of my favorite. Like, I don't get super excited to listen to it, but I agree. I think it's one of the more like emotional. It probably is the most emotional point of the album, and I think it's track 7 out of 10, and it's kind of where you kind of need a change in sound, something to kind of freshen it up. So getting this song with just these huge, wide, synths, and kind of the westerny guitar, the the almost jarringly simple lyrics, it just does hit really hard.
Yeah, and I will say after that song, I don't think the album dips in like quality, but I will say Waltzing in Blue, The Wild People, and then the closer, Death Trip to Tulsa, like those some of the songs that kind of grow on me. Waltzing in Blue, that maybe is the least memorable song on the album. Like I feel like I like the concept of it, but I feel like it would have been better if it was like a shorter song, almost like an interlude. Like I feel like it doesn't really go nowhere. Like it just kind of repeats itself a little bit too much. Um, like it does make me kind of question, like, oh, is this song like a waltz? And is it like a bluesy waltz? Is that why it's called Waltzing in Blue? Like it is interesting.
Negative.
Yeah, it's neither. And I do like the vocals and I do like kind of the lower kind of sounds of the synths, but it does less for me than most of the other songs. And then the Wild People on first listen, I thought was going to be the same, but the Wild People did grow on me more. I liked the acoustic guitar in it. It was a nice change. And then we mentioned also the lyrics earlier. That song, the Wild People, what pulls me in is the lyrics. Are the lyrics?
Every time I see that song or hear it, I can't help but think of the book Where the Wild Things Are. I don't know why my brain just
I
cannot
thought you were
stop
going to
making
say
that
the Wild
association.
Thornberries.
No, not quite. Not quite that one.
Do you know who does the voice on the Wild Thornberries?
Flea.
Yeah.
Is the name Donnie or something?
Yeah. And then the closer too. The closer took a while to grow on me. It again, maybe when I just first heard the album by like song, even though it's not a long album, it's a relatively short album. It's under 40 minutes, but by the last song, I was wanting there to be still like a little bit more of a livelier sound. And but when I go back now and listen to Death Trip to Tulsa, I actually do think it kind of bookends the album nicely with Harvest Home being the opener because it sounds a little bit more like Harvest Home where like I actually hear a bass line. I like when I was listening to it just like 2 nights ago, I was like, actually giving this a deeper listen, like the song has like a really actually like prominent bass line. It gives me that low end that I kind of been wanting from some of the other songs. Um, it's a very interesting title. It's a very menacing song title. Um,
It's kind of
it's
chaotic.
but it's like dark and it's a little rockier.
I didn't mean that in a bad way, just
Like
observation.
I think like the lyrics are kind of again like heavy theme. It's kind of dark. And again, I really like the way he sings the line, fell into the strangest lonely, 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 lonely dream. Um, but yeah, like Death Trip, like those last three songs took a little bit to grow on me. Where the beginning of the album, other maybe than like Judgment Time, like Killing Season, Seventh Day, Harvest Home, even I'm the Wolf, those ones stuck to me first on the first listen more than the last three songs. But the last two definitely grew on me. The only one that probably hasn't grown on me a lot is Waltzing the Blue, which again does not have any like does not sound bad. I just think it should have been like a interlude almost.
So it's kind of interesting because I think I think it's fair to say that you and I actually kind of feel pretty similar about the album, which with the tracks we like and maybe don't like as much. For me though, I do agree. I think Waltzing in Blue is the weakest track because I think it is the most repetitive. It's not too long, but yeah, it feels kind of long. For me, for some reason, out of all the songs, Death Trip to Tulsa is the only one where sometimes I forget how it sounds in my head. I have to like listen to it for a
I
second.
agree. Yeah, it's not as memorable as again like the Killing Season or Seventh Day.
And on my first listens, my least favorite was "I Am the Wolf." I just thought maybe it was like,
It's the most like
uh,
Mark Lanegan cliche, I think,
yes, exactly.
because it does
And
sound like this lullaby a little bit in like its tone
yeah, and just I don't know. I didn't really initially love the "I Am the Wolf," and then he starts talking about like his pack. I thought maybe it was just a little bit
on the nose.
clickbait and a little on the nose. Perfect.
But I liked it because the acoustic guitar gave a nice change of pace to the rest of the album because it's the first time on the album I think you get acoustic guitar.
Well, Judgment Time I think
Oh
has
yeah.
it,
Okay.
but this is like the full on acoustic
Yeah.
song.
And it sounds like I like the textures of the acoustic guitar. It almost sounds like maybe was it a classical acoustic guitar? Maybe.
Yeah, because it's got like that really fast picking, like a
Yeah.
classical
Where you're
song.
not really hearing like the buzzing of the strings and stuff.
Yeah, and that is part of why I do like that a lot more now. Because I think it is a
Nice
really
detail.
nice. Yeah, yeah, and I think this album does have a lot of details, and maybe because of, I mean, I like the production a lot on the record, but because it is more of a, there's not a lot of like actual dynamic range. Maybe some of the details feel a little lightweight or whatnot. But I think the song like "I Am the Wolf" showcases, the variety in the album, the interesting textures, and you know, yeah, it's a good breath of fresh air on this record for sure.
Yeah, and I am appreciative you gave me this album as opposed to a ton of other Mark Lanegan albums you could have given me because it does have a different sound than I assume the rest of his soul albums have. And now that we've done a lot of these albums back and forth, I've given you some albums that have a lot of pop elements to it that you maybe didn't think I listened to, which is maybe why you decided to give me this album because this album does have some kind of pop elements or production. Because by the way, it was produced by someone, I don't know how you say his name, Elaine Joannes, Johannes.
Johannes, maybe.
He did actually like mixing for Rated R, and he's done a lot of he's actually done a lot of like extra like studio work for albums. Like he played a lot of instruments that look like on Chris Cornell's first solo album, Euphoria Morning.
Oh,
Um, and like he's played like guitar, bass, percussions on a lot of like No Doubt and
whoa.
Queens of the Stone Age again, like Songs for the Deaf. He did organ and steel guitar. So like um it is interesting like the production on this album. And looking at the like some of the critics review this album, some people either like liked it a lot, loved it, like 4 out of 5, or some people gave it like C pluses, like kind of
Really?
kind of stale review. Yeah, like so I bet you some people just weren't loving this change of pace. And if this was just a one-off album of the sound, I think that's a cool thing to have in your discography for sure. Like, especially if the rest of his other albums have like a darker, more heavy rock sound or a blues sound. I think this is a nice change of pace. And it would make me very curious on like what his other albums sound like. I will say when I was researching this album, it wasn't until last night did I realize that he released like a on Wikipedia it's described as disc 2, so there must have been like a deluxe version he released later with an EP called No Bells on Sunday, which again sounds like a religious nod. And it's a 5-song EP that actually features 3 songs that are like over 5 minutes long, which are longer than any of the songs on the normal edition of the album. And although I didn't listen to those songs, you because you told me not to, you told me that you've not even heard these other songs.
Yeah, and
Um,
I think maybe I have heard that there's maybe bonus ones, but I didn't think they're even on Spotify. But it turns out
yeah,
they are, but listed as an
but
EP, like you said.
I gave them a quick like I just kind of listened to parts of some of these songs and skipped through them. A couple of them had an even harder like venture into that electronic sound. I don't remember which one. Maybe it was Sad Lover or maybe the one called Dry Ice. Like a couple of them had like even like more upbeat synths and almost like some dancey kind of drums. So I almost think if he would have added one of those songs, maybe like a shorter version though, because like I said, one of them is 8 minutes, one of them is almost 6.5 minutes. And he maybe would have taken out something like Waltzing in Blue and added one of those songs. It would have given the album just an extra bit of dynamic that it probably could have needed to make it even better. But that said, as the album as it is now, I do think it's an enjoyable album. Um, and I do think I will be very interested to hear other albums from him.
A couple things real quick. One, I think enjoyable is a really good way to put this album because like, like I mean, of course, like none of the songs are like groundbreaking in terms of like, oh my gosh, this is so innovative. But I think it's just a really well done album that had a goal and it was executed well. And I think you were talking about like the critics review. I think for your ninth album and working with various artists, I think this is a really great album for him that still has a lot of classic Mark delivery. It still sounds like him, but does have different elements. And kind of just a random kind of fun fact here is Josh Homme actually plays bass for a couple songs on one of his records and does some backup vocals on his Bubblegum record. And then kind of one more thing throughout, you had mentioned, that you were actually kind of the one that has showed me some songs with more pop elements and electronic things. And to be self-aware with the podcast, you talked about Tom Waits was like the first album I gave you. It was kind of like my goal, like, okay, well, here's something that I like that you haven't heard and, whatnot. But I've actually really been enjoying giving you albums with things that I know you kind of like. That way, I can hear your thoughts on how this artist pulls it off or not. So I thought this was like a perfect record to give you, and I'm glad you liked it for sure. And it would be interesting to hear your thoughts on some other Lanegan records. And I'm gonna be honest, I am not super familiar with all his stuff, but I do know, a good handful of songs. And one of his greatest hits, I forget what it's called, but his greatest hits record is actually a pretty good compilation of standout Mark tracks.
And I'm going to add a new segment to this series, and it's going to be
Oh,
called. I don't have a catchy name for it yet, but I'm just going to call it "To Vinyl or Not to Vinyl," and it's going to be if I like an album enough that one of the albums you gave me, if I like it enough, that means I would purchase it on vinyl to add it to my collection. Because, for example, out of all the albums we did, I've added now 2 of them to my vinyl collection. We listened to the Incubus album. I liked it so much. I saw it was on sale one day on some online store. I bought it. Same thing with Stone Temple Pilots with their album that we covered. I bought that. And
which I'm
there's some
surprised you got that one, honestly.
yeah, because I've been wanting to add more. I wanted to add albums by artists that I don't own anything from to expand my range of music. Because like, yeah, I
Mhm.
can go buy another Chili Peppers album, but it's like I already have a lot of their albums. But Like I don't have any Incubus. I don't have Stone Temple Pilots. And then there's some that I've been wanting to buy that I just haven't been able to find, like Elliott Smith's From the Basement on a Hill.
That's a kind of a tougher one to spot.
Yeah,
And
and
you know,
then I
or
so
good.
this would be sorry, this would be one I would buy. Um, but yeah, like I like this one enough, and I do think it's a mood. Like the album is a mood that I would want to put on during certain times.
Yeah, I do own this record, and I do like listening to this one. Like not in the background, like I'm not paying attention to it, but if I'm just kind of doing some like kind of light chores or
No, it
something,
is
just
good
kind of
background
settling
music
in,
because, like I
it's
said, nothing
perfect.
stands out. Like not in a bad way, but like nothing. Like there's not like there's not like okay, we really quickly talk about like Darkness on the Edge of Town, Bruce Springsteen. Like some of those songs like are huge, like anthemic songs, right? But like there's nothing like that on here. Like these are more low key songs. And
Right,
yeah,
like
you can listen to it and get fall into like the lore of like the lyrics, but you don't have to. You can also just it can kind of be background music.
yeah, for like the Darkness record, when Something in the Night comes on, I gotta go walk in the room and just sit next to the speakers.
Yeah.
Enjoy that moment. And something I just want to mention real quick is even I don't actually own Incubus's Light Grenades on vinyl because I think the last few times I've been to the record store, I just haven't seen it. And then
Yeah, it's
um
not one I've seen. I had to buy it online.
and then the other record of theirs that I would really want to get, Make Yourself. That one, the only one I see at like the record store is the one with the stupid music on vinyl label, which automatically adds an extra like $20 to it.
Yeah. Plus, the listeners should know, like, I have over 600 records in my collection. You have probably like close to 100.
Probably close to 100. And to be fair though, a good amount of those is stuff from our parents because I
Yeah.
do like a lot of classic
Yeah.
rock and like
Your collection
Police and stuff.
is definitely way newer compared to mine. So you just haven't had a chance yet to like own. Like I know you like have every Elliott Smith album because he's one of your favorites, but you don't own like
The
every
only
Chili
artist I've
Peppers or
completed,
yeah. Where
and that's not even including Heat Miser, which I want to get.
I've completed like a ton. Like I have every Death Cab album, every Tragically Hip, every Spoon, every Pearl Jam, every Petty, almost every Bruce, almost every U2, Radiohead, Foo
Wait,
Fighters.
really? Radiohead too?
Yeah, like I own. Yeah. Then there's some that just like Neil Young just has too many for me to own them all. Same with like Bob Dylan, but yeah, I have a lot of artists where I have like all theirs. So and you'll get there one day.
And I mean, for me, like I think other than Elliott Smith, which I do have all of his stuff, and I would want to get all STPs at some point. But like with the Beach Boys, it's kind of like that case where like I have a lot of them already. But let's be real though, there's a certain era in their career where I don't give two shits about the music they put out. So I don't know. I'm kind of liking doing the record collection thing, because it encourages me to listen to more, and us doing this podcast has really been instrumental to my record growth.
And to be fair, you do own two of the records that I gave you, right?
I
So we're
do.
tied.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, because well, one of them I bought you. I bought
You
you.
gifted.
Yeah, I gifted you Tragically Hips fully completely because that was one of your favorite records that I gave you on this podcast.
And it was kind of like a congratulations gift for purchasing a turntable that you actually approve
Yeah,
of.
upgrading your turntable, and then you went in and bought at a record store. You bought Bruce's Darkest on the Edge.
Oh, yeah, dude, I just pulled like the biggest brain fart. I was like, what other record did I
Yeah,
buy?
yeah.
But yeah, no,
And you
I've
bought that
spun that at
yourself
least
because
5 times already.
yeah, I know. We're gonna do an episode down the road for our 1 year anniversary of the podcast where we talk about our favorite albums we've given each other and like songs. Because I'm very curious now if, and there might be an album before, up until then where you might like even more than those two. But I'm curious which one you like more, Darkness or Fully Completely. But don't answer yet. We're gonna save that for another episode. But yeah, that'll wrap up this episode. Thank you for giving me this album by Mark Lanegan. Rest in
Thank you
peace.
for listening.
Rest in
Wait,
peace
one more
again to Mark
thing.
Lanegan.
So you're bringing up the what did you call the segment? To vinyl or not?
To vinyl. Yeah, that's not what I'm going to call it. I gotta think of a better name.
So something that I was trying to do at the beginning of when we started this podcast was to make sure to talk about the album covers for each album, not like to spend a long time because we're not like
Oh yeah, I
artists or
dig the album
anything.
cover. Yeah, it's like this person that's like a skeleton, with like this. It gives me like like Native
Cinco de
American.
Mayo.
Well, yeah, but like I don't know if it's like Day of the Dead. It does like the skull, the face looks like Day of the Dead, but then like what they're wearing, like this almost like robe blanket thing, kind of gives me like Native American vibes. But then it's like skeleton, and then there's like a flower, and then I really like the title and his name, Mark Lanegan Band. I like how they're on the sides of the album. And then I like the color scheme of like kind of red and black, and then this yellow. I do really enjoy the album cover. Actually, out of all the albums you've given me, this is maybe my favorite album cover.
It's pretty stylish, I gotta say. I'm glad you're digging it too. I really like how like the skeletons like holding what kind of looks like these really big like white flower petals, but there's like a but for like the what do you call it? Not the, is it called the stem? I guess it's like rainbows or a
Oh yeah,
rainbow.
I see that now. I didn't. I was looking at like a smaller picture of the album cover, yeah, but yeah, if I click it and make it bigger, it does look like it's a rainbow.
Yeah, so when I spin the record and I have like the whole like out sleeve, whatever you call it, the sleeve like propped up, it looks pretty badass.
Yeah, it is a really good cover. But yeah, I think that'll be it for this episode. Again, rest in peace, Mark Lanegan. Next week we're gonna be back to finish this series for the month on the album. We're gonna be talking about my pick for Tony, which is gonna be Ben Folds' first solo album, Rockin' the Suburbs. So stay tuned for that, and you'll be hearing from us soon. So until then, take care, and we'll be talking to you soon. Bye bye.